joining us on your lunch hour or dinner hour or wherever the world finds you at this moment. I'm Jim Ambuske of George Mason University, joined as always by Martha Howard of the Omohundro Institute. And we are delighted today to have an exciting project that's in development and coming to fruition that takes us to a different revolution. Last week, we spent time in the American Revolution. This time, we're going to about a century earlier to another revolution that some people call glorious. Some people choose not to apply that term, but we're going to look at it nonetheless, and from the perspective of Scotland and the British Atlantic world. And we're joined today by Dr. Gillian MacDonald, who is an assistant professor of history at Michigan State University and the director of the Leader Lab up there, which is a very interesting pedagogical and institute and place where I had the opportunity to speak a couple of weeks ago on podcasting. She is developing a new project called Networking the Revolution, 1688 to 1692, and she is joined by Morgan Fox, who is a senior at Michigan State University, who is pursuing a degree in data science and has been instrumental in helping Gillian develop this project and serving in the Leader Lab as well. So, Gillian, Morgan, floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gillian MacDonald, and well, this is the start of the project. So, long story short, William of Orange invades England on the 5th of November in 1688, and basically faces little resistance in England. However, it's an entirely different story when you look at Scotland and Ireland in particular, mostly because the Scottish Parliament basically is divided between those who want to support William and those who are staunch Jacobite supporters, and Ireland is primarily Catholic. So Ireland is not happy about the situation going on in England. And so what happens is James is forcibly removed in England and effectively in Scotland, where the Parliament essentially says that he forfeited his crown. So they take a more radical approach than England does, because England argues that they abdicated, whereas the claim of right in Scotland is far more radical and basically says that he forfeited his crown because he was a tyrant, because he tried to impose religious amenities for Catholics in Scotland and had people sign the Test Act, and that was a whole lead up to this in the 1680s. But what happens in 1688 through to 1692 in Scotland is basically the equivalent of a civil war. And so there is a lot of chaos. There is historiographically debated today the amount of people that actually supported William and supported James is still not, there's still not clear numbers on that. There was a very active underground Jacobite network that entirely starts in 1688 and doesn't actually finish until 1745. So that's going on in the background. And then there is the Williamite War in Ireland, which starts in 1689 and goes to 1691. And then to finish off the situation in Scotland, you have the Glencoe Massacre in 1692, which effectively sends Jacobite resistance underground. What we're interested in is how this information network percolates, essentially. So like, how do people communicate with each other during warfare, and how does this spread throughout the British Atlantic world? Because we know that the revolution doesn't stay put in England. It actually spreads right across the British colonies, and there's quite a lot of fervor for it in the 13 colonies and in fact in the Sugar Islands as well. And there are a number of governors writing back from Barbados and the Leeward Islands and Antigua saying there are rowdy Irish Catholics here. What do we do with them? How do we put this resistance down? And they're writing back to the Committee for Plantations, who's writing to the Secretary of Scotland, going, why are people acting like this? What are they doing? And so we're interested in how all these people are connected through information and networks, essentially. And this adds to the bigger picture because I think there are some scholars that argue that William wasn't really interested in what was happening in Scotland. But my larger argument is that he had to be interested in what was happening in Scotland because James actually lands in Ireland in 1689 and is in control of the vast majority of Ireland. And he takes over and then he forms a Dublin Parliament which stands in opposition to the one in Scotland, in Edinburgh. And basically, he does very well in Ireland. And I think what has been forgotten is that he was a very successful military commander. And when he does face off with William at the Battle of the Boyne, he's very narrowly unlucky. And he isn't per se that he doesn't go underground, and he also has all of the support coming from France as well. And Louis isn't uninterested in what's going on. He's trying to distract William from the Continental War, and he's pouring this stuff into Ireland to try and make William move his armies out of the continent to give him an advantage as well. So there's a wider geopolitical thing going on here, as well as this big network that is stretching across Scotland to the British Atlantic world, into France. It actually stretches into Scandinavia as well. And that will be where we build the project as well, because there is a larger network here. We just haven't had time to get there. But this project was kind of a happy accident sort of project that kind of tumbled out of my research that I have been working on for the last 5 or 6 years. I recently got into network analysis, which is where this project comes from generally, because a friend of mine, Kalani Craig, introduced me to the inner workings of network analysis and how that might change your perspective on how conflicts work and how people are connected and what that looks like. So basically this project came out of corpus of letters that was really central to one of the arguments of what will be eventually a book project, but the Leaving in Melville papers. So one of the things about the website is that we've organized it in a way that allows people to explore the team, the project, the context for the project, and then there is a number of pages for visualizations at the moment. The one that is the most decked out at the moment is the sort of the Leaving in Melville papers, which we have done quite a lot of analysis for at this stage. I'll let Morgan talk about the nuts and bolts of behind the scenes in a second, but this is just to give you an idea of what the big overview of the project looks like. So the site itself is built on GitHub. It is a free open source repository. There is an MIT license on it, but it's only for basically if you're just going to use the data, just cite us essentially. So the data is there underneath the data folder. There is a lot of code. There are CSVs, and then there are the Python code to which is what makes the visualizations, and Morgan will talk about that in a second. But Networking the Revolution is essentially a big data project on how people are connected, what the degrees of centrality are for people talking to each other through warfare, the correspondence, how that stretches across time and space. So what we're working on right now is the Committee for Plantations, because as we know, the revolution at the end of the 17th century actually stretches into the Atlantic world as well, and actually becomes an issue in the 13 colonies, but also in the sugar plantations. So, and this is what we're working on at the moment. Just to put this all together, we're going to build a bigger map that has clusters of where letters were coming from and where they were going to. And we're also going to build bigger centralized graphs that have the people that are talking to the people in the plantations, the people in England, and then in Scotland in general. We also have been very lucky to have access to a lot of digitized documents, but there is a number of manuscript documents in here as well that we've actually had to turn into quantitative data and then make it machine readable, essentially, which has involved a big process of data cleaning through OpenRefine and then putting this into the project. But recently we have gotten more money for the project, and it is now going to be moved to its own domain. So it'll be networkingletters.org instead of Gillian GitHub, blah, blah, blah. So now it's going to be on its own domain, and hopefully that will allow more people to use the data. We have had some people use the data and reach out and ask us about the accessibility of the website and maybe give us some feedback on how we can make things a little more accessible. So we're building an API. We're giving access to the repository through the website, and we're building out the context and like the historical argumentation that goes alongside this as well. But so far from our analysis, we have found that there are certain people in Scotland that are more connected to other people across the conflict. One of them being the Secretary of State for Scotland, who generally just keeps his fingers on the pulse of what's happening during the war. And this is readily apparent in the most connected nodes section of the website, where you can see the sort of quarterly connections here. I could zoom in a little bit. So these quarterly connections actually show how dense that network gets from this one Secretary of State over time. And Morgan actually designed this in Python. So I'm going to shut up for a little while and let Morgan talk about how she did this, because she is the brains and the magic behind it.
So yeah, as Julian said, I mainly use Python to create all of these graphs and do a lot of my data analysis. And kind of like the nuts and bolts going into it was, well, we manually entered a lot of the data into just Google Sheets to create that initial like CSV file. And the platform you can use to code is called Jupyter Notebook, which is like an open source software just for like programming languages. So for this case, like Python. And to get the actual like data in there and to create the visuals and to, do some of the math and the data cleaning, Python has something called like libraries, which are essentially like a toolbox, like with pre-built like tools or like code where you can do various things with your program. So like if you want to do like a network graph, there's like a Python library called like NetworkX that you use. Or if you want to make visualizations, you use like visualization libraries. Or like data analyzing, you use like this library called pandas. So all these different libraries allow you to do different things with your code. So that's kind of how I got to analyze the data and create these graphs that you see on the website. But yeah, we went into a few different concepts here with like degree centrality, and we also used the Gervin-Newman algorithm, which basically both of these things help measure like node connectedness and seeing how many direct connections like a person, or in this case like a node, has in the network. And then the Gervin-Newman algorithm helps find these clusters and breaks apart the network with the weakest bridges. So it's helping you find communities in the network essentially and looking who's connected to who.
So just to add on what Morgan was saying there, our general methodology was just to find out how connected people were during warfare, because I think there is room for more discussion and room for more research in this area, particularly in the late 17th century. And one of our goals basically was to try and find what the information distribution was during the time period, who was connected to who, where the clusters of those networks are, and overall to democratize that pursuit of knowledge and expand the potential for research in this area, because it made me and Morgan think differently about who had access to information at the time as well, and then how these people gave information to other people, because there has been a noticeable shift in recent years from people using manuscript into like the sea of digitized papers. But what we have found is that a lot of these networks can be built purely with metadata, which is really interesting to think about how big these networks can actually get without actually going to an archive and diving into the manuscript material. Not to say that that isn't worth it, but it's a different way of looking at how these people are connected as well.
So thanks so much for the presentation. It's fascinating. And before other folks jump in, I know we all have a lot of, I think there's a large variety, let me say, of technical expertise represented here. Some people I think are, on relatively low end like me, curious, but maybe don't, build stuff themselves as much, or are working with people who do sort of things. So I was wondering, I was curious, could you explain building an API, you said, like, what does that mean exactly, and why do you want to do it? Like, yeah, and then I suppose how is the march out, right? Because I think that is like another level of concern once you get into these projects, yeah?
So an API is basically an application programming interface, and it's a set of basically rules on how things interact with each other. Basically, an API is built with the purpose of interoperability of data, so that if you wanted to use the data that we have, you could download it and then use it. Essentially, the API that we will build will allow for that to happen. And it's basically just an interface that's built in the command line. It's the little black box that has the arrow in it if it's a Mac.
Right.
Or I'm not sure what it looks like on a Windows computer, because I am a Mac user forevermore. But it's essentially a way to allow data to be used by a multitude of people. So it gets it into a state that can be used by multiple users and can actually be accessible to anyone that wants to use it, essentially, is what an API is.
All right, cool.
And I am also a beginner in the API things, so I am doing that by learning. So if that answers your question.
No, that's great to know. Thanks. Yeah, because I think it's often this exact kind of thing that seems insurmountable, especially at certain times of the semester, perhaps, or it seems like, oh, that's a project for summer me or something, right? But then if it's too, you get there and it seems big, right? It seems like a lot to learn or something, right?
It is actually a summer me project, because
okay.
we just did get grant funding to build it over the summer. So yeah, so we're very excited about this. And this is how I keep Morgan employed.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, congratulations.
So it started to make me wonder, as you're talking about this network expanding, who is talking to who? What kind of, as power is shifting rapidly in Scotland, Ireland, England, in the sugar plantations, what do we see people saying to each other, and what types of people are beginning to interact in ways that they possibly haven't before?
So what we do see in this period is not just people that are highly connected and in power. So it's not just people like the Privy Council or parliamentary members that are talking to each other. It's actually people on the coastlines as well that are writing back to their provost of the city, or they're writing back to the Secretary of State and saying, there's people on the coast here that don't look very friendly. Can we do something about this, please? And then there are, what we found actually is a number of intercepted letters. So there's a lot of people that are talking to each other that maybe aren't interested in the Williamite government, because there is a few in the published collection of Leaven and Melville papers that are intercepted letters from people writing in Scotland to people in England saying this is an absolute mess. So, and then there are people writing from Ireland to people in Scotland saying, well, are we rising up or are we staying put? Like, and then there's obviously the people in the plantations that are writing back to the government going, what are you doing to suppress this? And what are we meant to do if we get invaded by the French? And so what we're finding is a large swath of society is actually participating in this network. And this isn't just men, this is women as well. Wives of these privy councillors, like the Duchess of Hamilton and the Countess of Leven. And there are actually people that are writing to the Maxwells of Pollock as well in Glasgow. So, and writing from like the rural parts of Scotland going, there are big parties of people that support the Jacobite cause. Like, what are you going to suppress this? Are you not going to suppress this? What's the general plan here? So there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of chaos, and there's also a very active underground network that is supplying the Jacobites with information. And we're trying to piece that together as well.
Well, that takes us to metadata, which is equally chaotic if it's unstructured and unorganized. So I guess two related questions. One, well, let me start here. What kind of metadata are you working with?
What we're looking for in general is a set of information that essentially allows us to look at nodes and edges between certain things. And so we cleaned up the data and did some exploratory analysis, and then decided that we were going to look at particularly senders, who those senders were. So we're looking at like names of people that were sending letters, and we were looking at if they were sending, if it was a letter, what that type of that document was. So it's either a letter, a list or an account or a memorial, or so we've split those things up as well. So you have like the sender information, the receiver information, so their name as well, and then we have a date, and we also have like the archival record in there as metadata as well, and then places is the metadata that we're interested in, where it came from and where it went to, essentially, is the data that we're most interested in right now. We are also going to expand this into keywords as well. What was actually like, what keywords come out of the letters, like whether it was talking about, say, the Battle of Killiecrankie or the Battle of the Boyne, or if we're talking about the plantations, slave uprising, things like that. So we're interested in how all of these things fit together, but also how all of these things look separately as well.
And just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the chat or do raise your hand. I have several other questions, but Anne Smart Martin, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. And like many of us here, perhaps we're really excited to see this visual. And so I'm wondering if you can share with us a couple of key items. And one would be kind of what is your, and this is for you and Morgan, kind of give us a favorite, exciting creation visual, either depth or breadth or information. And then kind of paradoxically, what was one that gave you the most surprising information? And I know you're just starting, but I'm sure you have some favorites.
So I do have a visual that I thought was most interesting, and it is on our website. Um, it was this the networks that were subplotted. Um, yeah, that would be great. Um,
Just keep them.
okay. But yeah, it was this subplot visual of the over the years. And
Okay.
I think it's just interesting to see how like broken up it initially is, and then you just see it as this huge like web building these multiple like communities and how they form and they fade, and you can see just how big like different influences are. Um, and you can see like there's even like a few unexpected figures like who end up being like central. And I think it just gives you kind of like a clear sense of like the shifted influences when like reading the letters and seeing how that, spans over time.
This is my favorite visual. So this is kind of a map that we built in, I think it was Flourish, we built this one in, and this was kind of the reach of just one particular set of letters. So this is from the Leaving and Melville papers, and
Lovely.
what we found was that there were clusters in London and clusters in Edinburgh, which we weren't that surprised about, but there's a whole bunch of letters going into Europe. And then there's a whole bunch of letters going into Dublin and then Belfast and then all of these different places in Scotland, because that's where the campaign is taking place. But also there are clusters in really like strange places that weren't actually connected to the campaign in any way. It was just people writing back to the Secretary of State going like, you have to fix this. The country's being torn apart. Like, what is going on? Here, are you actually going to be doing anything about this? Which was part of the impetus for this particular visualization. And you can see it actually gets really quite far up in Scotland, but the majority of it is focused in this sort of central belt of Scotland. So it goes from like Aberdeen all the way down to sort of the western coast. And that's where a lot of these larger voices and communities that are speaking to the Privy Council and the Parliament are coming from. But it also shows that people in London were equally as concerned as with what was going on in Scotland, which I think was part of the impetus for the project, because there is a certain conception that they weren't interested in what was happening in Scotland because they were too busy dealing with other things in England. But these visuals actually prove that they were concerned with what was happening in Scotland and it was becoming a problem. So
Yeah, just one more. This is the hardest one, which is to say one that kind of blew your was there something that blew your assumption out of the water where you're going to go, this is unbelievable or not? Perhaps it.
I didn't think people were as connected as they were.
Ah.
So there was the blew me out of the water stage, like, oh, so all of these people really like were writing to each other, they were connected to each other. And I think the one thing that really surprised me was the underground network, the Jacobite letter network that's going on. And so one of the things that I found in my research was that there's the Dowager Countess of Errol is actually running an entire spy network out of her house in Aberdeen. And I'm just like, huh, okay. But and hopefully that will be one of the next visuals that comes up as well. But that was really surprising. Something that came up from the research and the data collection as well.
Well, thank you, and we'll look forward to hearing more about those as you can follow up more. But thank you. That's a kind of intimate story of the images you don't necessarily get when looking at the site. So we have you guys to ask.
I think it's also a good reminder there at that last bit that women in particular were very active in the Jacobite revolts from the 1680s through the 1745. I mean, that your comment there about the Dowager Countess reminded me of Lady Margaret MacDonald, who was essential in secreting Bonnie Prince Charlie out of Scotland in 1745-46. So I want to ask about keywords because you mentioned keywords. That's sort of self-created or that not self-created, but that handcrafted metadata that can quickly spiral out of control. So how do you decide what is going to be a keyword, what's not going to be a keyword, and how do you cull um, the bloat that might occur when you develop keywords for such projects like this?
I love this question because I don't really have an answer to it. But so I arbitrarily decided that there was only going to be a maximum of 6 keywords that come out of a letter, essentially, because after a while it gets to be a lot. I mean, most of the letters like have a particular purpose as to why they are being sent in the first place. And generally it has to do with a particular event or a particular person at the time. And if, say, it's the Viscount of Tarbet, he is writing to the Secretary of State because he has been accused of being a Jacobite. So, like, the key word there is Jacobite, essentially, or like accusation. And you could have those two together. But, like, generally, because I've studied the period for so long, what I am looking for are particular references to people and things that are happening at the time. So generally the letters are sent during this period. They are either sent about something that has happened, they've found someone of suspicion, or someone captured a spy at the local port, or there has been their sons are away to war, essentially. So I did arbitrarily set a sort of 6-word limit on the keywords, but the keywords actually were interesting. We do have a visual somewhere about the keywords. Do you have that handy? Morgan's going to look for the keywords visual where we actually did make a graph of like the most common keywords across the corpus. And it was an interesting outcome actually, because a lot of people start talking about King James and you're like, I thought we didn't like him. So there's a lot of people talking about him. There's a lot of people talking about Ireland. There's a lot of people talking about Scotland as well. So you can kind of see that shift in mentality. So they just start talking about all of the things that are going on. We actually found that the most common word that was used was parliament. Which was really weird because like we didn't think that they would care that much about Parliament, but apparently they did. And then it was King, so that was King William, and then Mackay, who is the big general that William brings from the Netherlands, and that's Hugh Mackay, and he is a major general, and he is Major General Hugh Mackay of Scourie. Then they talk about Ireland and Scotland a lot because that's their backyard and that's where all of this fighting is going on, essentially. And then church, because the Church of Scotland isn't settled until 1690. They're all really kind of like, why are we going to talk about religion? Are we going to talk about what we're doing with the church? Because are we going to an Anglican model? Are we going to the Church of Scotland? Are we going to be Catholic? And they're talking about like how this is going to be settled. Service is service to the regime, which I thought was interesting that they were all sort of writing in and offering their service to the regime. The club was an interesting one because that is a radical group that forms because they are unhappy with the revolution settlement and they actually want it to go a lot further than it did, and they want to really press on this idea of Presbyterianism rather than the Church of Scotland, which is less hardline. And then after that, we have Hamilton, who was the head of the Privy Council and the High Commissioner for Parliament in Scotland, and then King James. So, and as you can see, the sort of the lines get really, really colorful, and it was actually that was a fun visual for me. I think that one surprised me the most. So,
Morgan, let me ask you how, as a data science major, you approached history and historical records. What kind of What assumptions did you bring to the table as you began to work on this project, and how have those assumptions changed as you've continued through it?
Yeah, so coming into this from like a data science perspective was really interesting, especially seeing how we could like bridge the two fields together, and then just seeing how we can translate like this large collection of historical letters into something that can be analyzed in a digital way. And for me, I don't have like I did, or prior to this, I didn't have as much experience with like, any sort of historical networking. I'd only done it more on like a numeric sense of numeric, relationships and network graphs. So it was a really like cool challenge for me and like working with like sort of like this messy historical data and then building like something more dynamic and a network visualization and just seeing how we can make those insights more meaningful. And it was like just like cool to see how the network graphs could reveal different patterns that like we might have initially missed. And then for me, it also helped me kind of, work better with my code and collaborating with like Gillian because like it helped shape my code and see what was really needed. So like having different pop-ups or labels or for the quarter by quarter graph, seeing like why that time analysis was important. So it was really cool to see how everything was kind of connected and bridging our two disciplines together.
Safe to assume at this point that you will be getting a PhD in history based on these experiences.
No, but she will be doing a minor in history.
Well done. Very good. As we're coming towards the end of our time together today, I wanted to ask sort of some big picture questions, which you kind of touched on, but where do you go from here? What are the improvements you'd like to make, the expansions? It looks like you're heading into Scandinavia a little bit, and certainly an interest in the plantations in North America and the Caribbean. Where else are you interested in heading? Are there other collections that you have your eyes on that you'd like to incorporate into the project? And what are some of the additional questions you have that you see emerging from the data that you excites you as historians?
So, at least on my end, we have several collections that we're collecting data for right now that we are actually planning on putting into this. So one of those is an expansion on Melville because like not all of his letters are contained within this corpus that's published. So we're adding in his letters. We're also adding in the High Commissioner for Parliament, Hamilton, because he actually is very well connected and has his own spy network. So we're adding in him. We are adding in the Privy Council because we have all of those materials are digitized, which makes this really nice and really easy for metadata. So well, it'll take a long time because there are thousands of letters in there. The others that we are hoping to add are some military commanders as well, because they're talking to each other in the field in a way that they're not talking just to the Privy Council or Parliament. We also have, I think, our eyes on some local collections as well of letter corpuses. We're focused on letters, mostly because that's the primary way people are connected to each other in this time period. And obviously, we're working our way through the Committee for Plantations letters at the moment. And we will eventually, hopefully, connect that with one or two prominent people from England as well. So that's where we're going in terms of sources at the moment, and certainly into Scandinavia because there are like a very big maritime connection is going on between Scotland and Scandinavia as well. And there are Irish collections, but they're unfortunately behind a paywall right now. So that involves more money. But I'm going to let Morgan jump onto this because she certainly has ideas about the visualizations.
Yeah, I mean, as this expands, it's obviously gonna create a lot more challenges, just, connecting everything, especially at such a large level. And I think that just kind of ties into like the just like kind of network we decided to build. And as like mentioned before, we focused a lot on like the clear sender and receiver columns that we had. in our data set, which, led to us making a correspondence network, and how we model that flow of information over time, especially in relation to like warfare and political alliances. So I'm kind of just excited to see like how I can do that computationally, or like what other tools I can use to implement, whether it be something with programming or something more, simple, like we've used like Flourish, um, Giphy. There's so many different network tools out there that I have yet to explore, or get a little bit deeper in. So I'm excited to see how I can do that in a much larger scale than just this project alone. So yeah.
I guess, and one last big question, since you're dealing with a large corpus of data and we can think about data as being interoperable, are there projects out there that you'd like to see your data interface with to leverage the power of yours and leverage the power of theirs to answer even greater questions?
I mean, yes, there are projects out there we'd like to interface with, particularly the ones that are dealing with early modern Scotland and early modern Britain. Death by numbers comes to mind here because there are a lot of people dying in this conflict as well. So, but they're not dying from the plague. So, one of the other projects is mapping the Reformation, because there is a significant religious component to what we are doing here as well. And a lot of the people that are writing letters are involved with the church or charity in some way and trying to help defenseless people. So, and one of the corpuses that we're interested in is the charity roles as well, that come from the church and from the Privy Council, and that actually connects these people in a wider scale too. So I would like to work with Mickey and Chris if the opportunity presents itself as well.
I think that's a great place to end it. Gillian, Morgan, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And everybody else for joining us
Yeah,
today
thank you.
yeah, thank you. And we will see you in a couple of weeks for more exciting digital projects in hashtag Fast Early America.